Hey guys, it's Andrea. I'm curious to know if y'all use the Zodiac to plant by the Zodiac, and if you do, have you seen a difference in your garden? I have the old Farmers Almanac, and I've been using this for the past 3 years. I buy it every winter because it has a lot of stories in it and different kinds of just old folklore and stuff like that, and I like to read it. But I also buy it because I can use it to know when to plant things, and I just wanted to show you guys how I use it. So I know, like, you would first have to figure out your last frost date, and I know in my area my last frost date is around April 15th, but I actually don't plant until around April 25th because I know that we usually still get a light frost after the 15th. So you just have to know your area and know when your last frost date is. And then just even at your house, it might be different from someone else's house that's 10 or 15 minutes away from you. If you can go and plant a couple of days before them or maybe a couple of days after, it depends on a lot of things. But I know that mine is in April. So you can go to the book and go to the section that lists all of the dates, the months and the dates, and then you go to the date. So I know that I'm aiming for after in late April. So that's what I'm aiming for. And then I want to plant it in a certain sign. So if you know the signs that are good for planting, then you can just look in this book and look up what day that is, and you'll know when to plant your vegetables and fruits and things like that. Now there are 4 signs that are good planting signs, and they are the ones that you want to look for. So they are Taurus, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And I always aim for Cancer. That's when I like to plant. Now you want to plant according to the moon phase as well. So some of your plants, your above ground fruiting plants, things like tomatoes, peppers, all of those type of things that fruit above ground, you want to plant those in the waxing moon. So that means the time from when the new moon happens to the full moon. Those are the plants that you want to plant during that time. And you also want to plant it in a sign that is good for planting. So that would be either Taurus, Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces. And then your underground crops, such as potatoes, onions, carrots, things that grow underground, you want to plant those in the waning moon. So that's the time from the full moon to the new moon. And that is how you know when you need to plant things. So there's just a couple of things that you have to know. And I'm not an expert by any means on the stars or anything like that, but my husband is. So he has a computer program and he looks up all of this stuff. But I know that I can use, and I do, and I just check with him, this Farmer's Almanac. So I go to April, which is the month that I want to plant in. I find on the side, it lists these, right here, it lists the sign, and you can find the abbreviations in this book. But I know that I want to find Cancer, and I want it to be a waxing moon. So I want it to be between the new moon and the full moon. And so I've got Cancer is down here on the very bottom. It also tells me what day the moon is in. So it's on day 8. So I'm good. I know that I can plant on this day, which is actually April 28th and 29th. So those are the 2 days that I'll plant my above ground crops in the spring, the first time that I plant. And it's pretty easy to read this book, and it tells you up at the top when the new moon is. It tells you the phases of the moon and when they are, their date on this month. This is a good tool. I'm not saying it's the best tool, but it's a good tool to plant by the Zodiac so that you can get more out of your crops. Ever since I started using this Farmer's Almanac, and my husband, he looks stuff up on his stellarium thing that he has for his computer. Ever since I started doing that, my crops have grown so much better and been so much stronger. And you know, of course that doesn't apply to all crops. Sometimes I might miss it, you know, I might not plant on the correct day, or just some crops don't do good. But overall in my whole garden, I found that this actually helps, and I have produced so much more food since I started actually using the Zodiac to plant my plants, and just going by just a couple of these things. And I don't have these things memorized. I have them, you know, written down, and then I have this to use to look up the days. But those are just a couple of things just to get started that you would have to know, that you don't have to be an expert in this, and it's fairly easy. It's just a simple little calculation that you do, and really everything is in here. Everything that you need to know is on this page. The moon phase, the sign, the day of the moon, and then your date would be over here of when to plant. And there's a lot of other information on here, like the rising of the sun, the setting of the sun, the length of the day, and all of that stuff doesn't necessarily apply to me. It's not something that I need to know, but I do need to know when the moon is going to be in the sign that I know is a fruitful sign that will produce good fruit for the garden. And so that's what I do, and it has served me well ever since I started doing this. I've been doing it for about almost 4 years now. So and I do go by this. And then in the fall, the same thing. I'll count back from my first frost date in the fall. When I want to start my fall garden, I will count back 6 to 8 weeks, depending. My area is a little different, so I planted mine 6 weeks out from my first frost date last year, and it was just a little short. Things weren't as ready as I thought they would be by the time cold weather came. Even though they were cool season crops, I need to plant them a couple weeks earlier. So there's another time that just trial and error has gotten me to learn and be able to do things. But I do use this for the fall as well, and I count back however many weeks I need, and I know, okay, I need to plant in this month, and then I will find the sign that I want to plant in, and I will look at the phase of the moon, you know, how old the moon is, which is on this very last row. It tells you how many days old the moon is. And as long as you're, you know, anywhere from 1 to, I think about 15 or 16, well, whenever it says that the full moon is, then you're okay. So you just want to make sure that for fruiting crops, you plant in the beginning, the new moon, the waxing, so from the new moon to the full moon. And then for root crops that produce under the ground, you want to plant in the waning, which is from the full moon up until the new moon again. And so it's not too difficult to grasp, and I don't really know if a lot of people still use this. I know a lot of people that have been gardening for many years, a lot longer than me, do use the Farmers Almanac, and they have always said that it made their garden produce a lot if they planted by the Zodiac. And so I started doing it, and I'm glad that I did, because it has really helped me to have a good crop on a lot of my plants and planting at the correct time. There is other things in this book that you can see that's about the Zodiac. So it's got eclipses and information about that, and the moon's paths. It's got stars. I'm guessing people would use this for telescopes and stuff if you wanted to look at meteor showers and stuff like that. It's got the planets. I mean, there's just a lot of interesting stuff in this book just for winter reading if you like to read like I do. But the main reason I buy it is to be able to look up when I need to plant my plants. And then I check with my husband, since he's got a software on his computer that he looks at the heavens, and he tells me if this was, and most of the time this is pretty correct. I mean, it's pretty correct as far as when you want to plant. So It's a good resource to have. The only starting thing that you have to have is you want to know your frost dates. So regardless of when you were planting, if you were planting in the spring, you want to know that last frost date so that you can plant accordingly to after that last frost date, unless you had a greenhouse or were covering your crops. So in the fall, when you wanted to have a fall harvest, you usually plant in the summer. So you just want to know that first frost date in the fall so that you can make sure and count back the days that are on your seed packet so that you can get that planted in time for it to be ready to harvest. Depending on what the crop is, a lot of winter crops are frost hardy, not necessarily freeze hardy, but frost hardy, and they will survive. But you want them to be big enough to survive that, and big enough that it's not gonna, their growing won't slow down super fast once it gets really cold. So you want them to be a good size before it starts getting really cold and you start getting those light frost. So you just count back, you figure out, okay, this is the month that I need to plant my fall crops, and you use the Farmers Almanac again, look up the sign, which would be one of the fertile signs. So that would be Taurus, Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces. And then you would say, okay, look at the day of the moon on here, figure out you want to be before the full moon. So after new moon, before full moon for above ground crops, and then the opposite for root crops. So those are just the things you have to look out for. And once you, if you had one of these and you looked at it and you figured out, this is the page, figured out exactly what, it's self-explanatory and it tells you what to do. So if you had one and you read it, and then it would be easy to try to get that, understand that certain point. It's not too much information, and I'm not going into the meanings of stuff and why it's good to plant in these signs or anything like that. I'll do a different video about that, but this is just to show that it is easy. And also I'd like to know if anybody else, what their experiences are with planting by the zodiac or using the Farmers Almanac to plant your crops. Did you have a good experience with it? Do you still use it, or did you decide not to use it? That would be interesting, because I don't know too many people that use the Farmers Almanac anymore. So that would be interesting to see if there's actually other people that use the Farmers Almanac to plant their crops. So thanks guys, I'll talk to you next time.